A Senate report into corporate tax avoidance will be released this morning as lawmakers struggle to force multinationals to pay their fair share of local taxes. Labor Senator Sam Dastyari chairs that committee to put that report together. He joins me now from Canberra. Senator Dastyari, good morning to you. How big a problem are we talking about here?
Huge. I mean, the size of the problem, it's actually difficult for us to actually quantify just how big this problem is, but we know it's huge. We know there's a handful of multinational companies operating in Australia, in particular, who are gaming the system, who are taking advantage of our tax system and our tax rules, and are getting away with shifting billions of dollars offshore.
What companies are we talking about?
Well, look, I mean, the evidence that we were presented in the public inquiry, there was the big tech companies, there was the big mining companies. I think part of the big problem in all of this is just the lack of information that's out there. Now, look, I'm not in a position to talk specifically to a report that hasn't yet been released, but my personal view has and remains, and has only been increased by the public evidence that I've seen, and that is that we actually have to hold some of these bigger companies to account.
And how do you propose to do that?
Well, I think part of what we need to do, and again, I won't speak to a report that hasn't yet been released, but I think part of what I've said from the start is that there needs to be greater transparency within this system. That if we actually start giving people some more information, start giving consumers some more power, they're able to demand better government, and they're also able to hold these companies to account.
How do you practically go about doing that, though, involving greater transparency in what is a very arcane system so far?
It is. And the point I do, before getting to that specifically, I also want to point out that, I think we sometimes treat this like it's a victimless act. It's not. Tax minimisation, this kind of aggressive tax planning isn't victimless. Every dollar that's taken out of our tax system is a dollar that's not going to a school, to a hospital, to a road. And I think what you can do on the transparency measures is give the ATO a lot more power in what information it can and can't release. Now, again, I'm not going to go to the specifics of something that's yet to be released, but I think there is a fair number of practical recommendations that can be taken up.
This would involve changing privacy laws, which may be fine here, but it would also involve other countries, other tax jurisdictions. How do you get around that challenge?
Look, I think what we have to be prepared to do is take both multilateral and unilateral action. And what I mean is there is an international process going on, the BEPS process. The Treasurer talks a lot about it. The Tax Commissioner, Chris Jordan, who's actually a decent bloke, talks a lot about this. But I think there's also unilateral action that we can take. And, there's such a thirst for information here. There's such a thirst for knowledge. There's such a thirst out there by the Australian community wanting to know what's going on here. And when you start looking at some of these figures and you start realising what's going on, it's staggering. Look, everybody pretends this is very complicated. And on one level it may be, but at a large level it's really not. It's very simple. The principle behind this is very simple. How do I artificially make my Australian subsidiary company look like it's not very profitable so that all the profits can be kept in an international company in some kind of a low tax jurisdiction or tax haven? And I just want to give you one example. The example of an iPad. When you buy an iPad that retails for somewhere in the vicinity of $700, what you're really doing is you're buying your iPad from Apple Australia. Apple Australia, through a whole series of other companies, is ultimately buying it from Apple Ireland. And their goal is to create a situation where Apple Ireland is selling that iPad to Apple Australia for as close to $700 as possible, so the profit that's actually being made in Australia is minimal, and the profit being made in the low tax jurisdiction is high. That's the simple principle that's at play here, and it's costing us billions of dollars.
What would naming and shaming companies you cite as offenders actually achieve?
Well, look, I think the Starbucks example in the UK is the famous example everybody points to. A company that hadn't paid tax for 5 years, and it took community pressure and community outrage to actually get them to change their behaviour and act. I think it does two things. Firstly, it allows consumers and voters to demand more action from government. I think it has that impact. And secondly, these companies do care about their reputations and they do care about their market share. And actually exposing some of the worst practices, I believe, puts a lot more community pressure on these companies, and I think is the right way to go.
Before you go, a question about the latest opinion poll, the Ipsos poll in the Fairfax papers today. It shows the Labor Party would win a commanding election victory if one were held last weekend. But it also shows Bill Shorten, your leader, would essentially win by default because people, they may not like Tony Abbott, but they're not exactly flocking to him either.
Look, I don't accept that. I believe we can and will we will win the next federal election, and we're going to win it because we're going to present an alternate vision for the country, and I think Bill's doing that.
Does he need to do more, though, with an approval rating below 40%?
Look, I find it hard that on the morning that there's a poll out there that says that we're on 54-46 two-party preferred, you're here telling us that are we doing enough? I think Bill Shorten's doing an incredible job. I think he had an incredible ALP National Conference, and I think it's going from strength to strength.
Just covering all bases. Sam Dastyari, thank you very much for your time
Thanks so
this
much
morning.
for having me.